happening. Scorsese, is heading a group of people which is to attempt to save color film, which color film has a life of 40 years at the most. And then it begins to change, it becomes horrible.
Et puis ça commence à changer, ça devient
But a very interesting thing came out of this project. Kodak has made a much better film,
Kodak a sorti une meilleure pellicule
which will last much longer.
qui durera plus longtemps.
They also remarked that they had a film which was much faster and much cheaper, and that they'd had it for about 30 years. And whenever we all said, "Why didn't you give it to us?" They said, "You didn't ask."
Nous leur avons dit.
Martin Scorsese set himself the impossible task of attempting to save films of historical importance from fading into obscurity. You see, colour negative would fade quicker than black and white, which is why a lot of filmmakers were reluctant to switch from one to the other. And come the 1980s, a lot of the films Scorsese had enjoyed in his youth looked destined to be lost. So he organised for a lot of movies to get the restoration treatment.
You will see here an approximation of how the 3 black and white records are printed with dyes onto one piece of film. You will also see the damage to the negative caused by mold, which was eating away at the emulsion. Once the mold had been cleaned off, fissures and cracks it had created needed to be erased digitally, frame by frame. We'll be showing you before the restoration and after restoration comparisons. Here you see the damaged negative, and now how the restoration brought the film alive again.
Though I have no love for the film Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, I can appreciate the effort and time which went into making this film look as close to how the directors had originally intended it to be seen.
We chose Vertigo as a candidate for restoration for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's a great film. It's one of the most important films ever made. Number 2, the film elements themselves, both picture and sound, were in dire need of preservation.
Vertigo is also a film that audiences have not seen on the big screen for years, in fact 12 years. It was last released theatrically in 1984 and the elements were poor to say the least.
Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo was restored in 1996. It took roughly 2 years of work to hunt down the best quality elements and assemble them together into the best looking print that has possibly ever been assembled. Hitchcock was a visual filmmaker and the movie really looks its very best. But an entirely new audio track was created, remixed in surround sound, which is not the director's true vision. And what made it worse is they missed out several key sound effects, which added to the atmosphere and the tension. This has since been corrected and those sound effects have been reinstated.
One of the great things about Welles as a filmmaker is him capturing the periods of whatever he was making the film, the paranoia of what was going on in America. It's really reflected in Othello.
Orson Welles' Othello is often overlooked when talking about the director's greatest work, but the original edit won the Palme d'Or at the 1952 Cannes Film Festival.
There's his version, and then there's a version that Beatrice redid.
Called some friends who were in the business, the movie business, and sort of said, where do you think one could find a negative or whatever's left of Othello? And they ended up finding it in some lab in New Jersey.
They made, I think, a few mistakes.
What Peter Bogdanovich is politely referring to is the disastrous 1992 remaster, which attempted to rebuild the soundtrack in stereo, distorting the original audio so much that several characters had to be revoiced by sound-alikes.
Welles post-synced most of Othello, and Americans have a great phobia about films being out of sync. I don't care particularly that much, but that seemed kind of glaring at the time because it violates what is considered the Hollywood norm of technical perfection, which we have a fetish about in America. But when I see the film now, I really don't care that some of the lines are out of sync. And I've always maintained that Welles would sacrifice synchronization to a line reading.
For years, the Beatrice Welles version with the resynchronized dialogue was the only version available. Criterion has since released the 1952 edit which won the Palme d'Or, together on disc with the Orson Welles re-edit done in 1955.
there were still repertory cinemas in the 70s in New York and Los Angeles and around the country, so you could probably get to see. The problem with repertory cinemas at the time was that the prints were getting older. So what you saw, you see it on a big screen, but you may see excerpts from the shortened version of Once Upon a Time in the West, that sort of thing.
Right.
And the only thing available for the video cassette on that, I think, was a cropped version. But part of that, was a limitation in technology. But even on DVD, when DVD first came out, there was a sort of confusion with aspect ratio. For example, a major title like Bonnie and Clyde, I think, was first released full screen. And I do think you remember. I think that there were confusions with 185, which is a normal spherical widescreen, not anamorphic, and I thought they maybe considered releasing it full screen 133 was good enough, but I really don't think it was. And anyway, now the potential of the Blu-ray to replicate the original theatrical experience of seeing a film is so far, this is the best format that I have. I've been through 40 years of this, so the quality, the higher resolution of the high definition mastering, and really the support now of the extraordinary teams at the studios behind these remasterings.
A lot of present-day restoration isn't even restoring the film. It's nothing more than a digital enhancement in an attempt to make an old film more palatable for a modern audience. What is currently on screen is the restoration featurette from the Straw Dogs Blu-ray. Someone at Fremantle Media seems to think that boosting the contrast up so high that the whites blow out is an improvement. And there are endless videos on YouTube talking about how grain reduction has made their favourite movies look like they're being performed by mannequins now.
Cameron, you see, has always been one that's been kind of obsessed with technology and has always been eager to bring his work up to date. However, this has sometimes caused some consternation among film purists. Studio Canal's 4K transfer of Terminator 2 Judgment Day has long been mocked for sporting a waxy digital look.
I'm not sure why people think that grain is a flaw of film shot on celluloid when it's actually where the detail of the image lies. But things don't stop there. I know that Buffy the Vampire Slayer with Sarah Michelle Gellar is not a movie, or even a show I particularly enjoy, but we'll put both of those things aside for a moment as it was remastered in 2014. Now this show was shot with movie cameras, so they recorded a widescreen image in the knowledge that the left and right would be cut off for broadcast on the then standard 4:3 television screens. But the remaster, rather than keeping the original aspect ratio, as it was always intended to be seen, they used the full negative, as consumer tastes had switched to the 16:9 televisions by then. But because this area was never meant to be seen on screen, often at the sides of the image you can see a crew member or the edge of set. Sometimes when it was really bad they had to use a completely different take. And it's been recolor time too. No moody shadows anymore, no, it's all brightly lit. That's going to make those vampire prosthetics look their very best, I don't think.
We're probably going to have to talk about Star Wars. Now, Star Wars has been re-edited and re-released several times just within my lifetime. But this is the exception to the rule here, because let's just talk about New Hope. I know George Lucas didn't direct Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi, but he was the creative force behind them. It was George Lucas himself who re-edited these films. It was him who added the extra scenes and recolor time in some things, added sound effects, changed special effects. It was him. Would be a different case if somebody else came along and changed it. Let's see, an artist owns their own work until such time as they sell it to somebody else. So if Leonardo da Vinci came back from the dead and saw the Mona Lisa and said, "Oh my God, she got no eyebrows," and wanted to paint eyebrows on it, we would have to let him. But I couldn't go into the Louvre and say, "Well, I would like her to have eyebrows." It's not mine. I cannot do that. If an artist wants to change their work, we have to allow it. My problem is when things are changed away from the director's intent, it never ends well. So enjoy these things while you can. I'm Scott Kingsnorth. I'm watching a movie.